Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to December's interval training. I'm Rebecca Campbell, Senior Director at Peloton. Thank you for joining today's training, which is all around Oracle workflows. The format for today is roughly 20 minutes of a demonstration by my colleague Holly Muir, followed by a few minutes of Q&A. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started. Everyone, everyone will be muted during the training and chat will be disabled. Please put your questions in the Q&A and we will get to the questions after the demo. If you have questions that we weren't able to get to, please feel free to reach out to us. We'll put up some contact info at the end of the training. And if you have ideas for future trainings you'd like to see, please let us know. So without further ado, let's get into the training. Over to you, Holly.
Thank you, Rebecca. Guys, thanks for coming today. Really excited to talk through Oracle's workflows. If you're anyone who has been in the Oracle Fusion space for a while, you would understand that the workflows is a very wide topic. So we're going to do our best to summarize it. Today, we're going to talk about an overview of Oracle Fusion workflows, some configuration methods, such as using BPM, spreadsheet loaders, and using the UI to create different workflows within Fusion. Tips and tricks on how to create personal workflows for customers, and how to manage workflows as an admin. As Rebecca noted, we're going to leave a little bit of time at the end for Q&A. Okay, let's jump right in. Oracle workflows, what is it? It is a predefined process within the Oracle Fusion Cloud application software that automatically routes transactions like an expense report, a purchase order, through a series of designed user and review rules and approval workflows based on some rules and conditions, typically following a hierarchical structure within an org, ensuring proper authorization before finalizing a business action. That is the best definition we can give you guys. But essentially, it's a systematic way to manage approvals for various business processes. That's that last line right there in the Oracle's definition. Okay, so when we are designing workflow approvals within Fusion, I've prepared some steps for us. So when we're designing it, step one, what you're going to do if you're designing a workflow, it doesn't matter what the transaction is for. Could be for an expense report, could be for a purchase order, could be for a supplier edit, like a new bank account on a supplier record. It could be for an invoice approval workflow. It doesn't matter what it is. These are the same 6 steps I will always recommend that you walk through. Step one, you're going to choose the workflow that you're going to build and the point of assignee. Step two, you're going to choose the approval type, which is called a then statement. Step three, you're going to determine the conditions of the rule, which are called the if statements. Step four, decide on the participant type. 5, you're going to QA the rule and ensure it's complete and foolproof. And lastly, you're going to manage the notifications and user actions. All right, so let's dive in. The first things first is choosing the workflow itself and the point of assignee. So let's start with choosing the workflow first. As you choose your workflow, I'm going to hop into the system here, and you're going to say, well, what workflows are available to me? The easiest way to look at what is available, you can go out to oracledocs.com and look at their entire inventory of workflows, or come into your Oracle application on your home screen, navigate to Tools and the Transaction Console, which is under Tools. If you have the security role of IT admin, you're going to have Transaction Console. When you come in here, over to the left side of your screen, there's a box called Approval Rules. Click on that. This is Oracle's new and improved way for you to manage all approval rules. So you could type in an approval rule in here. Say I type in a requisition. It's going to bring up I spelled that wrong, apologies. Requisition, it's going to bring up the requisition approval workflow here. The last time that this particular rule was archived or reviewed was 3 months ago. You could see this is a job requisition, approval for a job requisition if you're using HCM. And this rule is being bypassed, which means it's automatically being approved. I could look up coding, right, which is account coding on an invoice. Depending on how an invoice is coded, it routes to certain people on that coding. This rule itself, again, I could go into right from here. Or if I'm just browsing, they are in alphabetical order here, and I could just start walking my way through this whole list to see what is available for me to build. Today, we're going to build off a couple different rules. So first things first, you pick your rule, and part of the second step of this rule here is choosing the assignee. What does that mean as assignee? Assignee means, here's a very good example. Up on your screen, you see two different ways to build the workflow. One is within the UI, which is on your left side of your screen. The second on the right side of your screen is called the BPM work list. So in here, if you notice, if I'm choosing the rule of managing a requisition approval workflow, when I open up in the UI to build this rule, I have lots of different places of assignees. I can build my workflow at the header pre-approval stage and make it a requester FYI. I could build it in the header stage and make it a rule here in the middle of my screen using these particular participants and assignees. Assignee is really the same as stage if you look here in this column. Over here on the right side of my screen, an assignee is also over here as invoice approval header, invoice approval header. These are easy ones to know what's on or off. And really to choose your assignee, you can choose any of these places to build your rule. All right, on to step 2. You're going to choose your approval type. So at this point, folks, we have chosen what rule we're building. And in our example, let's say we're using account coding. 2, you've chosen your assignee. I chose where I'm building my rule. So account coding and at what stage or assignee I've decided to build my rule. Step 3 is I'm choosing my approval type, which is my then statement. If you're as logical as me, you might say, why am I choosing my then before my if? The reason why is in Oracle, the then statement drives your logical thinking of what you would select as your if or your condition statements. So when we're building this out, guys, we are going to choose the approval type. Do I want to build my approval rule based on a supervisory hierarchy, job level, position, approval group, or resource? These are the 5 options that Oracle Fusion gives you to choose and build your approval type from. Let's walk through a couple examples. The first is a supervisory example. Approvals can be set up based on an employee supervisory hierarchy, which is defined in HCM. If you're doing a financials implementation, you can still set up HCM Lite without triggering full HCM licensing. Employees must be set up in HCM with the appropriate jobs and supervisors. For example, a clerk reports to a manager who reports to a director. Resource A is set up with the job of clerk, and resource A has a manager who has a job of manager in the system. This manager also is set up to report directly to a director in the system. If this is the way your hierarchy is set up within Fusion, then you are set up successfully to use the supervisory approval type. If you want to use a job level, which is personally one of my favorites to use, Approvals can be set up based on employee job level, which is a hierarchical position. Job levels must be strategically organized to designate a resource authority approval threshold, and is typically denoted with a numerical code. So what this means is you have certain job levels. In this case, say administrative assistant is job level 1. A manager might be a job level 2. And a director might be a job level 4. And what that means is that this administrative assistant might have authority to approve up to $100 worth of purchases. A manager might have the authority to approve up to $5,000 worth of purchases. And a director might have the authority to approve up to $50,000 worth of purchases. So what this particular rule using a job level is you've assigned a number or a numerical code to each job that designates that they have authority to spend X dollars. The rule when you build this using job levels, well, if the purchase is for $45,000, the workflow is going to read that this is admin assistant level 1. I'm going to get their approval, but I'm going to keep moving up the chain until I reach someone who has the authority to approve that $45,000 transaction. And in this case, it would be the director, which is level 4. So it would keep moving up the chain until it reaches someone who has the authority to make the approval. Position. It's also an approval that can be set up based on employee position in HCM. These are typically associated with levels of authority in an org. You can use position. It's less. This is a less rule that's less used in typical implementations. A store manager to a regional manager to a general manager. This is a good view of position, even though this general manager might be a senior associate, but in the role that they play or position they play in the organization is they're a general manager of X. This is a regional manager of Y, and this is a store manager of Z, even though their compensation or HCM levels are different. The most used, again, is job level here in the middle. Approval groups is very similar to how it reads. It's a set of resources that we create in the system. We'll create approval group 1, approval group 2, approval group 3, or give them certain names, but they are grouped together. We're personalizing and taking different people and making an approval group if they can't fit into the supervisory job or position, right? These are ones where systematically we're going to create these, but approval groups we manufacture and we artificially create those groups for approval. And then resource. Of course, approval going linear to one other person. We put that specific resource in that rule, and these are the 5 options of approval types. Okay. Determining conditions, which are your if statements. In Oracle Fusion, an approval workflow condition for routing refers to a set of rules or criteria defined within an approval workflow that determines the specific approver's transactions, who it's going to be routed to based on parameters, essentially acting as a decision point to how the approval condition is going to be met. So some good examples of your if statements is if a transaction is of a certain amount, or if the transaction is coded to a department or a location or other relevant requests, then we route to supervisors, to jobs, to positions, right? That's really how it's going to go. So I'm going to hop into a rule because the best part about building these rules really is when you're building out the if and then statements. Okay, so let's go ahead and hop in and let's do a couple rules here and see what we got. So let's go to set up a maintenance, and I know we talked about going and trying out the coding rule. So let's go to account coding. So I'm going to go to BPM, and I'm going to start building out my coding rule. And if you notice for account coding, when I open this up, just like my screenshot showed, there are 3 different assignees. And what we're going to do is we're going to build some of these rules based on these assignees. So I'm going to hop into one and show you some different if and then statements. First things first here, let me hop in. You always want to click this pencil to go into the rule. Assignee. I will give you a little tip now ahead of our tips and tricks session is see how these items are all blue? They're in a blue color right now. That means all 3 of these technically are on. If I were to highlight one of these rules down here and I go to advanced and I click ignore participant, I'm going to show you here how if I hit save and I submit, and I go back to assignee, I'm going to show you really quickly here how the center one turns gray. See how that turned gray? That means that rule is off. It's turned off. The system is not reading that rule because it's off. So let's go into one of these account approval workflows. So the way you enter the rule is you click this little blue button and I click go to the rule. I love approval workflows because they really help you solve problems. So in this particular case, I go in here and right now, guys, Oracle has a couple rules set up out of the box. Oracle is always going to have rules set up out of the box. Typically, I'm going to read these rules and I'm going to say, do I want to keep it? Do I not? So for example, this one, invoice requester, their if statement says, if the invoice header requester name is null. That's how it comes out of the box. So if there's no requester name on my invoice header, then I'm going to route it to this resource as a required response. And I'm going to put the resource on as whoever the invoice header requester name is. So this isn't null. Who's in that box? That's who I'm routing it to. That's this rule out of the box. If I'm trying to create my own rules and I don't want Oracle's rules to conflict with mine, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in here and I'm going to hit, view properties or properties of this rule and see how it says active. Great. I'm going to go in here and go to properties of this particular rule. Let me hop into it myself. And I'm going to turn off Oracle's rules. So I'm going to go in here, properties, and it's going to let me turn that off. This rule is now off. And when you notice, I'm going to turn it off. See how it turned gray? That's how I know it's off. And so one of the biggest things that we have when people go to implement is they don't turn off all Oracle's preset rules. You really want to do that so they don't conflict with your particular rules. So let's just say I turned off Oracle's rule and I'm working on this one, okay? So I can either take a rule that's already existing here or I can create my own. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you guys, I'm actually going to copy a rule that's already built here. And I'm going to paste it in, makes my second rule, and I'm going to update it. I'm going to create a test rule. I'm going to make it active because it's already active. And I'm also going to show you here a couple little tricks on the priority. If you want priority of rules. So what this means is all of your rules, if they're always preset to medium, which means Oracle will read all medium rules as the same. So when you build a suite of rules, I could put this one as highest. And what that means is that Oracle is going to read this rule, then all the other rules. It's the highest rule. It overrides any rule. So priority means that's how the system's going to read the rule that you built. So, and I'm going to make this effective always. You could make this rule only effective to range from this date to this date, which is a nice way to just put rules in place for a period of time and to take them out. There's lots of different tips and tricks. This is a really powerful tool. So this rule I put as the highest. And so what I typically do is when you build out your rules, if I were, doing this one here from the ground up, is I could use what Oracle already had in here because I copied the rule, which is one option. So I'm going to leave this here. And, if you notice on my rule itself, this says if invoice requester is null and the business unit, the header business unit is US1. And I'm going to add one more piece to this. Hit the plus sign. I'm going to do a simple test. Notice my simple test came up as and. What if I want to do this? If I want to change this to business unit, I could go to this and I could click or. I could click and or. See, it could be and or, either one. So I'm going to put and on it, but I'm just showing you how you can do that. And for me, in these, when you're adding in a condition or a rule, you always want to click the magnifying glass. And when you're in here, you can search for anything. So right now I'm on an invoice coding rule, right? So say I want to ask department. I'm looking at it here. So nothing in department. I didn't hit enter, but if you notice, you can click anything you want here, or location. Okay, so there's a couple for location. So I have to think about this rule super clearly. And I say, okay, what do I want this? All those other pieces were saying header, header, header of an invoice. And I'm looking here and I'm saying, do I want this rule to run based on the invoice distribution or the invoice line? Okay. Now hear me out. An invoice line could have different locations on each line. It could have different locations on distribution. So when I'm building these rules, what I want to think about is, to be honest, this workflow, if I build it this way, could have two different approvers, which is okay if you want that. Or do I want it to have the same approver at the header level, right? If that's the case, I'm probably going to look for a variable to build my rule that's at the header, so then I have one approver. Make sense? So going through here, I'm building out all my locations. All my conditions of what I want the rule to be. So let's go with the word amount. So for the word amount, or looking at amount, I could use definitely at the header level. So here's invoice header at the total amount is always a good one. So let's go invoice amount, click OK. And it built my rule. Invoice header, invoice amount is, isn't, more than, same or more than, less than, same or less than, between or in. So I could use any of these to describe my dollar amount. Typically, I put same or less than $5,000. So when I do that for my rule, this now says same or less than $5,000. So this is the rule I've built down here. So now in this case, I want to show you guys some things. I'm going to get rid of this one that I copied down. Cut. And I'm going to build my own. So again, I showed you how I really like to add the approver here at the bottom. And my favorite one is really job level. I love using job level. It's one of my favorite ones to build. So if I use from job level, I love using it here, and I say job level is required. I usually do one level because I want it to hit the top level. And when you build your job level rules, you're saying at most one, because I at least need one approver. And at least I need one. Again, I need one approver at least for most. So some people might put at most two levels and at least one. But you can choose what you want in terms of your number of levels that your organization requires. Relative to, which means the creator, which is the person who's actually clicking the workflow, an absolute amount relative to absolute, which means it doesn't matter. It's one level, always one level, or to the starting point. So relative to the starting point of the person, which is who is the trigger. Let's put relative to starting point. In this case, we'll put starting participant. This will likely be my invoice header requester name, right? So I put that in this box. I put in my top participant, and my utilized participant here on this field, you're going to put all approvers are relevant, final approver only, manager, and final approver. So you get to choose what participants in the workflow get used. In this case, auto action is false, which means I'm not automatically approving it. I'm waiting for somebody to approve in the workflow. If I do want this to be an auto approver, I could put true there. But if I put true, my auto action changes from null to true. And that would be my auto approve. His action is true, is false. I mean, it's always going to approve. Okay, I built my rule. Now, what if I wanted, say there's a secondary approval in here. So first goes job. Let me show you a little trick. If I click this button and I want to nestle another approver under it, and then I always want to say the last approval is going to go to this resource. Watch what happens. Under this job level rule, under the then statement, I have a second. See how this came under it as a then? So first goes to job approval, then maybe lastly, it goes to a resource here. Maybe it goes to an AP resource or somebody that says this is complete. You don't have to do this, but it's definitely a nice option. Okay, so you built your rule. You can always validate your rule right here in the system, and it's going to give you information at the bottom of the rule to tell you what's incorrect, what's correct. Are you going to get an error with the rule? As always, you're going to save and you're going to commit the task out into the workflow. So in general, that's building our if and then statements on the rules. Flipping back to our PowerPoint really quick, the next thing that we're going to look at after we still build our if and then statements is the participant type. Now that the rule is built and I'm sending it out to everybody out in the org, do I want my participants, everyone who is going to receive this workflow, how do I want them to interact with this workflow? Do I want all assignees, like here's a good one, all assignees in the workflow to receive a notification in their email at the same time? Say there's 3 participants in this workflow, 3 people who are going to receive it. Do I want all 3 of them to receive it at the exact same time? And each one of them has to submit approve, approve, reject. Since they voted, and the majority on this parallel voting rule was that 2 approved, 1 rejected, this is approved because it's voting by majority. Make sense? The next type is serial, which is the most commonly used. Serial approval routing means that it's a set of assignees in sequence. So you have all 3 of your participants. Participant 1 receives it first. Once it's approved, it goes to 2. Once it's approved, it goes to 3. And that is the most used as the serial type. The last is an FYI, which you see on the icon. It's just these little glasses. There's no action on an FYI. The outcome is not affected. It simply just gives you the ability to add a comment, add an attachment to the workflow, and you're getting notified of it. Throughout the entire application, Oracle uses these icons to show you single, parallel, serial, and FYI. Okay. So when we talk through the rules, we talked about BPM, which is Oracle Business Process Management, and building the rules using BPM. Oracle has 2 other ways to build a rule other than using BPM, and that is via Spreadsheet Loader and User Interface. Okay, so let's walk through 2 of those. First things first, if I were to look at Oracle and I were to go to the Spreadsheet Loader. So let's go to that one first. So if I go to manage journal approvals right here, it's going to bring me to BPM. Okay. And I know you're like, why is it bringing me to BPM when it's going to the workflow? It's just, unfortunately, just the way the system is going to be built, but it's going to bring you back here to BPM. When I go to journal here and it says GI. And what typically will happen is most systems, if they're on the current version, will have a picture here that you can actually go to the journal approval and you download it from there. So let me open up the Excel sheet. And this is the journal template that you're going to get. So for journals and invoice approvals, both of these, you can use the spreadsheet loader. You're going to download this directly from that rule. You just click the download button, read the instructions and the sample rules they give you. And then you're going to go through these and you're actually going to build your rule right here. So just like I showed you in BPM, how it says, what is your routing rule? And you can read the comments that they have. You know, in the, you know, if I hit show and hide note, obviously you're going to be able to see these different comments that they have up here. The groups, the rules, the approval names, it's all written here just like you use BPM, but you're building the rule right here in the system. Okay. So I've prepared a couple here for you guys to look at. So here is a manager approval rule. I'm building the name. In this case, I'm using job hierarchy. So in Oracle, it's going to give you these options in the spreadsheet loader, just like it does in BPM. And this was my job level range. Now remember, this is a spreadsheet. So I'm going to come back to this particular field here in a moment. My starting approver, I said use my data set. Again, I could use a starting approver here of invoice header requester, creator, submitter, manager. There's lots of options. I put my top approver here as an email address. You know, my priority level, again, highest, medium is talked about. In this rule, minimum job level absolute, maximum absolute, effective approvers is all, and include all managers no. And these, if you use the voting regimes, of course, if you end up using the parallel versus serial rule, this has your job outcomes, percentage, default, etc. Now, these become my if statements over here, which are all these different rules. Amount, invoice amount, PO amounts, yes or no, invoice sources, etc. So you can build in a lot more if and then statements over here to the back half of my rule on the spreadsheet. Something to also note is if there's additional settings, I click this button and the macro on this brings up all the different things that I was describing to you guys for voting outcomes, enabling rule block configs, enabling lists, lots of different things you can add to this macro on the spreadsheet. All right, so with the spreadsheet loader, guys, I talked to you about these two custom fields that I built here in the loader. So I'm going to go to my data set. What I did over here was I built and said, hey, I built in my ranges, job level 1 to 0, 10 to 1, 10 to 0, 20 to 0, 30, 40, 50. And I put in my dollar amounts. And so what I did is I built these over here on my data sets based on different rules that I had. And then in the rule itself, I told the rule, which is my line 7 here, to run the job level range based on a dollar amount based data set. Amount based data set right here. So you can build lots of different custom rules that you want right here in the system based on this. And then instructions, you generate the file and simply load it back in. You upload it directly right back into the rule, and it's pretty simple. Very, very simple. Okay. So going back to our other way of building a rule in the system is using the UI. So let's really quick look at a requisition workflow. So managing requisition approval workflows, you can actually build the rules right in the UI. It's the exact same terminology that I've been talking about this whole time. You have stage, which is like assignee, participant, which is all the different ways you can do it. Your routing rules, parallel, serial, FYI, voting regimes, enable. You can see in this particular visual, we only have one rule enabled right here, which is on this one green. When you go in, if I were to edit this one particular rule, you're going to see at the top all of my if statements, my conditions, which are right here. See my and conditions? I'm building those right here, adding conditions, adding operators, if and then, a child, parent, building up the rule. And at the bottom, my actions, which is equivalent to my then statements. Action type, then, using routing, chain of, etc., etc. Okay? So there's 3 different ways really to build your approval rules. As I do a quick time check, I know we're getting close on time, so let me just zip through my last couple of slides. Tips and tricks. All right, first things first is you're always going to think about a round rule when you're building approval workflow rules. Your rule is meant to be a rule that encompasses any transaction in that workflow. So what I mean by that is if you're building an invoice approval workflow, you have to think of invoices, which are positive dollar amounts, and you have to also think of credit memos, which is the negative dollar amount of that rule. You also want to think about building out rules if someone were to leave the organization. So your best bet is not to build a rule with a specific user on it. Your best bet is to build a rule based on job levels, managers, and different things in the systems that can be easily switched around generically without having a specific user account tied to it. The last tip and trick I'd say is test every single segment of the rule. You want to, in that if statement that has a header amount, a business unit, and a dollar amount, make sure you're testing variables of each of those when you're testing out these rules. The last is managing workflows as an admin. So if I hop back to the system here, managing as an admin, I'm going to take you back to your main screen here. If you are an admin that's managing many different workflows, go to your transaction console on your main screen. And up here where it says transaction summary, I can see all the rules that are in the system at the same time. So right now, the system defaults to show me all failed rules. As an admin, I'm going to want to fix this. I'm going to want to process. So this particular one says status on this requisition was errored. When I go into this error itself, I'm going to read what happened, right? What happened to the rule? And I'm going to try to either fix the rule or reroute the rule. So right here, it's telling me what the issue of the rule is. It says set because a supervisor does not exist for this user. Easy, no problem. I would go into this user account. I would ask HR, who should be this user's manager? I will add that user to this. And then once I fix that itself, I'm going to go up here to actions. And I can either recover, terminate the process, and go back in and say to my requisition owner and say, hey, for requisition 20413, go back in and resubmit this workflow. That will clear from this list, and hopefully it goes to a completed and successful status, which is what we want to happen, which has a nice little checkbox like this on the front of the page. As an admin, I'm also going to show you if there's a rule that's in flight, like this one itself is in progress. So if I open this particular rule up and I'd say this one's in progress, and someone might say, hey, they're not here today. Can you help me? I've got to push this through the system. Well, as an admin, I want to tell you that we want these rules in place for a reason. So someone needs to approve them. What I can do is I can hit the actions button. I can either resend the notification to this individual Anita and say, hey, we really need you. Can you approve via your phone or your desktop? If not, I'm likely going to reassign this. And if I click reassign, it's going to bring up a box here and it's going to say, who do I reassign it to? Drop that name in and reassign it. And it's going to move that workflow out of Anita's queue into the new approvers queue. Okay. So lots of options to manage workflows, manage approvals. This transaction console is so powerful. There are so many different statuses to review, process names, priorities, who submitted it, person number. So much information in here. It's a really, really great and powerful tool to use. So with that, guys, I'm going to drop to my last slide here. Thank you all for joining today's training. Rebecca, are there any questions in the chat?
Yes, there are, Holly, and thank you. That
Oh,
was a fantastic demo. Yes, we do have a few audience questions, if you don't mind. The first one, how do we advise users to handle approvals if they are on vacation or out on leave?
great point. So in the system, guys, there's an option called vacation rules. And so when you are advising a particular person, in this case, to go to their own particular preferences, we want them to set their own approval rules for themselves. So when I went to your name up here, I just clicked the word preferences. And in this case, you can set your vacation rules in the system for a period of time when you're out. And this means that any rule or any approval in your queue can be reassigned or delegated to somebody else. I want to note you can make two different rules that if you have an expense report, they go to one person in your absence. And if you have an invoice approval workflow, they can go to a second person in your absence, two different people. But you control that right here on your own personal console. Any other questions, Rebecca?
Yep, we've got two more. As an admin of the system, how do I handle workflow transactions that are stuck?
Ooh, good. That's a good one. I love that Oracle has gotten up with our lingo because right on the left side of your screen in transaction console, there is a word called stuck. It's the best thing that's actually come out because sometimes we're like failed, error, but really this button stuck right here is going to show you anything that's just been spinning in the ecosystem. Sometimes people say, I know it's somewhere. I can't find the transaction. Where is it at? It didn't fail, didn't approve. What's happening? Use this right here, this button and this link called stuck on Transaction Manager, and anything that's out there spinning will be right here. And you can download these, and then once you click into them, you can actually reassign, move, withdraw, resubmit.
I love it. Perfect word, stuck. And finally, what is the best way to monitor approvals that are manual overrides of the workflow?
That's a great option too. So when you're in there's one feature in the system that allows us to override an approval workflow. So for example, if there's an invoice out there that has to be pushed through, has to be paid today to the supplier, and the person's out on vacation and did not set rules, well, we need to override it. And sometimes that happens. So our best way to do it is we create custom reports for you guys, a super quick custom report to monitor every single approval workflow that was manually approved. And what your supervisors and organizations should do is read this report weekly and say, I knew they overrode that one. I knew they did that one. I knew they did that one. The best way to do, again, is a very quick custom report, easy to build. You can build it in 20 minutes using the BI Publisher analysis creation of it and monitor that way.
Excellent. Thank you, Holly, and thank you everyone who joined us today. That is the end of our time together. Thanks again, and happy holidays, everyone. We will see you next year.